The holidays, although they are filled with cranberries and sparkling lights and Christmas trees and full of joy, sometimes are actually also full of grief. And so, in today's episode, we're going to talk about the grief and the tough stuff that is stirred up, especially during the holiday season.
Welcome to the Stop Suffering in Silence podcast with your host, Denise Walsh and Rachel Timothy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Stop Suffering in Silence. My name is Denise Walsh. I'm a clinical psychologist turned dream life coach. And as you can see, co-host Rachel Timothy is not here today. However, we have a fantastic guest who's going to walk us through her journey of grief and just invite us all into the conversation, because I'm sure we've all experienced some of these types of situations on one level or another. And guess what? The holidays sometimes make it harder. And so, big Stop SIS welcome to Pamela. Yay, the crowd goes wild.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you. Thank you for being willing to be vulnerable today, to share a bit of your story and the ups and downs that the holiday season brings. I know that our listeners will be able to relate to you and your story and to the triggers that the holiday experience brings. But in reality, probably a lot of seasons and days, and there's triggers all over the place when you lose someone you love. So if you're listening, I would love for you to give Pamela some love in the comments, show her some support, and share your story as well. I'm sure you have something to share and we want to hear it. So Pamela, let's start by first learning a bit about your story and the loss that we're grieving today.
Thank you. I'll just ask that you all bear with me because this is still relatively new for me and I can't guarantee that I won't cry. But in the last year and a half, I've really become accustomed to crying in public and it doesn't really faze me anymore. So
that we appreciate tears on this show.
So my family, I've grown up in the same place almost my entire life, and my family is all very close, and we do all the things together. We do all the holidays, birthdays, things like that. So it's been very normal for me to always have those people involved in everything. And last 2023, the day after my birthday, I woke up to the phone call that my younger sister, 37, who had nothing wrong with her that we are aware of, was found dead in her bed by her 6-year-old son. So that started a whole lot of, I'd never lost anyone close to me before. I'd lost grandparents, but it was when I was younger and I didn't know them quite so well. They weren't such a huge part of my life. And then to add insult to injury, 4 months and 1 week later, my uncle, who was like a father to me, also died suddenly of a stroke. And so him and my aunt never had any kids. So that threw me back into a situation of having to help plan funerals and figure out all of that stuff. And so to lose 2 people that were so vital in my life in such a short span of time has been really difficult because everything we have so many traditions that we've always done, and everything's different without them. It's been rough. My sister left behind her husband and 2 little boys. One was 6 and one was 2 at the time. They are now 8 and 4. So, but it's just really hard because they're not going to remember her. And so everything has, I can just be, going to Dutch Brothers and ordering a drink makes me think of her because she introduced me to it. Or I see a meme on Facebook and I go, oh, Katie would love this. She was a children's librarian. And so if I see something about children's literature or a pun about words, I immediately think of her. And yeah, so it's not just the holidays. It's all the time. But the intensity of the grief does change over time, but the presence of it doesn't, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you for sharing. Two people that you were so closely tied into, them being gone, it feels like you've lost a bit of yourself along the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so grief is grief, and grief is real. And sometimes we're grieving what was, sometimes we're grieving what will never be. And the memories you're missing out on. And so it kind of comes in waves and it hits you at inopportune times. But the holidays have a lot, there's like 6 weeks or so with Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, where there's a lot of family activities. There's a lot of these rituals, celebrations that that families have. And I'd love to hear what you've learned over the past year and a half to keep her memory alive and create new traditions, what's worked, what hasn't worked on your grief journey.
So, they say everybody grieves differently. And, there's so many people involved in this for me with all my other family members. That I've had to work really hard to be mindful of what I need, but also try to be mindful of them. And so like Thanksgiving and Christmas, we have a lot of traditions that we've done for over 2 decades, and last year, despite everything, my family I felt like they just kind of wanted to keep going and do it and not let that die. And I just wasn't in that place.
Meaning they wanted to keep the same traditions.
Right. They wanted to keep the same traditions.
And you were like, I can't do this without her.
Right. Yeah. So, all the plans were made to do the things and all of that. And I was going to go because I wanted to, support my family and be there. And I didn't want to be there, but I wanted to support my family. And praise God, both of the 2 big ones that I really was like absolutely dreading, somebody in my family woke up sick that morning, so I didn't have to go. And I told God, I was like, well, I'm sorry that you had to make somebody sick to give me my out, but thank you for doing it. And it wasn't serious. It was just little colds, So that was my way out. And I was very relieved both times that happened. And maybe that makes me sound like a horrible parent, but I needed a way out. So, but anyway, so we just stayed home.
That is an interesting conversation though, right? Do you keep traditions the same in honor of them, or do you change them because it's not the same? And we can't pretend that it is the same. And I think that's an interesting dichotomy and a question a lot of families ask after grief, loss, and change is, what do we do with this? Do we keep it the same or do we not? And there is no right or wrong answer, right? It's truly what's best that year, that situation, and things do evolve. And my guess is eventually they might change. But how did you guys navigate that dichotomy? And it sounds like you did a little bit of both. There were some where you kept the traditions and some maybe where you switched things up a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the Thanksgiving ones in particular were super hard for me because they've always been so special to me. So like every year we get together and the entire family and we'd watch White Christmas and we'd all take turns singing and dancing along. And it's just, I look forward to it all year. And my sisters and I would do the sister song, and so I couldn't think of doing that without her. I mean, I know I have my other sister, and that's great. I love her. But it just was going to be hard. And so, I mean, I did what I could to be clear on if it was something I really felt like I needed to say no. So like, for example, another one of our traditions is, so I didn't do the white Christmas thing, and I didn't go to Thanksgiving because those were the two hardest for me.
And those were the two that somebody woke up sick?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So you didn't have to set a firm boundary. You just were like, oh, darn, right. I'll stay in my PJs.
Yes. So, but for Christmas, our tradition has been for the last 7 or 8 years that we would pick a theme and we would explore foods that, you know, we wouldn't eat otherwise. So like one year we did African themed foods and another year we did Polynesian. And so we would really, and Katie loved that because Katie was so creative and she loved cooking. And so for Christmas, I did say to my family, I said, I don't really care what we do, but I just want to do a traditional Christmas. I don't want to do a theme. And they said, okay. And so that made it different enough for me that I was able to attend that. And I didn't feel the dread that I did about the other two that were essentially the same as what we had always done.
Well, that is another thing to think about and to consider, right? Is if it's that little bit different, it doesn't feel like you're doing it without her. It feels like a different event. And I think that's
right.
just good for you to know that if it's just a little bit shifted, then it hits your heart a bit differently.
Yeah. Yeah. So that made it tolerable for me. And, you know, we were able to get together for Christmas. So this year I actually have attended all of those things and I didn't feel the immense dread that I did last year. I mean, I still can't say that I wanted to go, but it felt possible this year, where it really didn't last year. So, and when it was all said and done with, I'm glad I went and I did have a good time, but you know, I cried in the car on the way home. So it just, yeah.
Grief is kind of both and, right? You're allowed to have fun back in your life. You're allowed to have new memories. You're allowed to miss her.
Yeah.
So it sounds like one thing that's been helpful for you navigating the holidays is tweaking the traditions just a bit.
Yeah.
So they're not fully the same. Is there anything else that has been helpful for you as family events pop up, birthdays, Mother's Day, other things that maybe trigger Katie's memory or your uncle's?
I mean, I do, like, for her boys, I've tried to be intentional about finding things to give them for, you know, Christmas or birthdays or whatever that will either remind them of Katie or be representative of her to them. Mm-hmm. But you know, that has its own level of complications because their father has already found another wonderful person. And so I don't want to make her feel strange or, you know, I don't want it to be off-putting, but I also don't want them to forget her. Right. Because she was a wonderful person and she loved them. So that's a really hard balance to know what to do with. And I'm sure with time I'll get to the point where I can speak more openly with my brother-in-law and her about it and figure out what they're comfortable with, but we're not quite there yet. So we're still getting to know each other. So so that's been a hard thing for me because I really want them to remember her.
Yeah.
But I don't want to overstep any boundaries so.
One thing I've learned through the years is that the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. So if and when a memory pops up, say the memory. Speak it out loud. Keep her memory alive. And if it somehow, some way becomes too much, they'll let you know. But not saying it because you're afraid, or that's not speaking, will do more damage. We don't want anyone, including you, to feel like you can't talk about Katie.
Right.
You don't want her sons to ever think that. You don't, so if you think about her, bring it up. Remember this? Oh my gosh, that was so funny. Remember when that happened? Oh, she loved this song. Let's play it louder. The more that you can, the more it doesn't feel like you have to pro and con everything, the easier for your healing. And in reality, there's too.
Yeah. It's hard, especially with that particular situation, because I certainly don't want to keep her husband back from being able to move on and live his life. But at the same time,
Yeah. Have you made the kids
I'm not ready to move on.
Have you made the kids a scrapbook of her?
Not yet. I have thought about it, but I haven't gotten to that point yet.
Okay.
I have no doubts I will, but I don't know how long it'll take.
Yeah.
But I did. So one of the things that they've done since Katie passed is her husband did sell their house and move, which I totally understand, because under the circumstances, I wouldn't have wanted to stay there either. So when they moved, I did give the boys a photo with a collage of pictures of them with their mom on it to put in their room. And on the bottom, I wrote all my love forever, and so they can put it in their room. So I did that, and that was, but I will at some point, I'm sure, do that.
If you, when you're ready, and in reality, they can probably have the same book, because in my vision, this is my vision of it will be a Shutterfly book, and it will include her childhood and her, so they can learn her story. So it's not just pictures of them together, but it's about her, And so then at the end, there'll be pictures of both of them in it. So on one sense, you can make the same book and give it to them both, so they have their own copy.
Right. Yeah. I hadn't really thought about adding her childhood to it. That's a great idea.
Yeah. I feel like they want to know who she was.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we did at her funeral was we put out paper for everybody who came. I think she had over 250 people at her funeral. And we put out paper where people could write a memory about her. And before I gave all of that to my brother-in-law to keep, I took pictures of it all. So I'm hoping to put all of those, memories and stories from people into their book too. So
yeah, that's super special.
So they can know that she was the type of person who, would trap a spider in the library and take it out and free it because she didn't like the idea of killing things. Right. Whereas I'm like, kill all the spiders.
Get them out of here.
She was.
Aww.
But yeah, that's that. I mean, and because she was a children's librarian before she released the spider, she took all the little kids that were there apparently, and she showed it to them, and she taught them about the spider, and then they all did a little spider parade and took it out and freed it. Like that's the type of person Katie was, and she was an amazing person. So. And unfortunately, we never got any answers as to why she died. Like, we have no idea what happened. So that makes it even more difficult to have any feeling of understanding or closure. Right. The autopsy was inconclusive, which I didn't know they were allowed to do that. So I thought
don't you need to keep figuring it out, until you have an answer?
I know. Like when a 37-year-old person just dies that didn't have any, problems, you'd think that they'd be more curious, but apparently they weren't. So, Yeah. So it just
So
makes
two things I'm hearing. Number one, switching the event a bit so it feels a bit new. It's not the same without her. It is a bit new. Two, talking about her when you think of her, and the goal is that she's not taboo. She's a part of our family, and she will always be a part of our family. And we want that to, we just want her name to be easy and to be the memories to come and flow, and that's okay. But what else do you do? Because you don't want to stay in, we talk about when you're overwhelmed with grief and you're in monkey mind, or it's like it's all consuming, and we can't live there. So what are some things that you do to get back out into living your life, and what are some coping skills that you do so you don't stay in that grief?
I mean, I think luckily for me, because I have kids of my own that I feel some sense of responsibility to not completely shut down for. They have really helped me to try and pull out when I have those times that I just want to run away. But, honestly, I think the thing that really helped me the most was so for over a decade, I've been doing my own, healing journey of trying to get over things from my past. And I've been, focused on that. And as I look at everything and how it developed, God was using that time for me to all of those years preceding, where I was looking at it as I was just focusing on me and what's my experience has been. He was really bringing an amazing community of people around me that really stepped in and helped so much in ways that I would have never imagined that I would need in this moment. And that made all the difference in the world for me, because I knew that there were people who cared. And, if I didn't answer the phone and I wasn't responding, they'd come to my house and see how I was. And they'd fold my laundry while I took a nap because I just hadn't been sleeping. And, they called the funeral homes and got pricing for the services. So it just was, I could see how he was taking care of me, even though I don't understand why this happened. So, one thing I would say is, if you don't have a community right now, when you're not in grief, or if you are in grief, start reaching out and trying to find those people. If you're not in grief, yay, but start building those things now, because they're definitely helpful when you're in the midst of it, because a lot of those people pulled me out. I wouldn't have necessarily been able to do it on my own.
Oh, no. You never can do it on your own. Yeah. And what I heard you say too is that, and this is for guys, when people are going through grief or even depression, anxiety, things like that, one of the worst things you can do is say, how can I help? Because they don't know. And so what we've learned, right, is that if you have a friend going through grief, just act. Just go fold laundry. Just go bring meals. Just go check on them. Just bring them a coffee. Just be, because typically when somebody's drowning, they don't even know what they need help with. And so I've learned that the best way to help is just to do. And it sounds like your community did that.
Yeah, they absolutely did. And it's funny, because one of the things I've always struggled with my whole life is the I'll do it on my own and I don't need help mentality. And, God had been working on me on that previous to this. And while I was at Katie's house after they had just taken her away, right then I've had the thought of, no matter what people offer, I'm going to say yes. Like, I'm just going to say yes. And I made that rule for myself. So whenever anybody was like, do you want me to do this? Can I do that? Or, tell me anything that you need. I took them at their word and I said, okay, yes. So like one of my friends, when she said, anything at all that you need, let me know. She was the one I called when I said, I can't face calling funeral homes. Can you do this for me? And she was like, absolutely. And within 3 hours, she had a list of 5 places and their services and how much it would cost. And so I don't know why I had that thought, other than it was just God saying, you know what, now's a good time for you to practice allowing people to help you. And so everything I just said yes to. And none of it made me feel uncomfortable. Like, I mean, if it was something I didn't want to say yes to, I wouldn't have made myself. But I wasn't going to say no because I could do it. So I would also
be a superhero in these situations.
Yeah, I would also encourage people to not try to do it all on their own, and to take people at their face value. If they say, I want to help you, just trust that they're being honest and let them do it.
Well, and people want to help. People want to feel needed. People want to be a part of things. And so absolutely take them at their word for it.
Yeah.
What about like coping skills, such as maybe listening to music, reading, journaling, going for walks? What are some things that you would do to bring your emotions in check?
So one of the ways that I've always connected best with God was through music and through worship. And quite honestly, for the first 6 weeks, I couldn't listen to a thing. I was like, nope. And I knew that was not a good sign, because that's how I'd always functioned. But eventually, I got back there and I tried not to be too hard on myself for it. But so eventually, music has been a big one for me. It always is. I have a playlist that I call Katie, and anything that really, really struck, a nerve for me about grieving, that I would put on that playlist. I've been adding songs to it, but I've never listened to it yet. Like in its entirety. I still haven't done that. But maybe I will someday.
Oh, I love that you're collecting those, though.
Yeah. I also have on Facebook, when I see things that make me think of her, I have a list called Katie and I save it. And, so I've got memes there, or videos of Mr. Rogers, because she loved Mr. Rogers, whatever. So that's been helpful. I tried to take a grief share class, but I think it was still just way too new, because literally I started it the week after her funeral. And so it just didn't really work for me at the time. It's wonderful content, but it didn't do much for me. And I think it was just too soon. But I would recommend that for people who maybe are ready for that. And then currently I'm taking the Healing Journey Bible study, which I've done 7 times before. It's a 29-week study, and it's been instrumental in my overall healing and spiritual growth in my adulthood. But I'm taking it again this year, and it's been helpful. It's an amazing study, and I'd recommend it to anybody. But so, just, and being honest, like I remember there was one time, I've grown up in church my whole life, and I know all the right answers. I know all the Bible answers of, I'm supposed to be okay. It's the Lord's will. The things that people say that aren't necessarily helpful or true. But, being honest with myself and with God and with everyone around me. Like I remember one day I was just bawling. It was probably a week or 2 after Katie had passed. And I just remember having this thought and this picture in my head of that I was in this dark room in a corner bawling, and Jesus was back there. And I said to him, I can't have you touch me right now, but please don't leave me. And that's just where I was at. Like I didn't want the Sunday school answers. And I knew eventually I would make peace with it, but it wasn't right now. And I just needed him to not leave me. And I feel like he didn't, and in the weeks after that, I just had that picture in my mind of, okay, he's there with me and I'm not alone. I just am not ready to go there yet. Right. And so, being honest with myself about that. And eventually, I turned a corner and I'm not feeling that way anymore, but I still struggle with the not understanding. So I guess those are the things that probably helped me the most, was just figuring out how to embrace the feelings. I saw a meme yesterday, actually, I think it was, it said, feelings are like children. You don't want them driving the car, but you also don't stuff them in the trunk. And that's really where it is. Don't stuff them in the trunk, but also acknowledge that they're there and
give yourself grace.
That's the only. Yeah, it's the only way to get through it. Because if you don't get through it, it's going to come out later, and it's not going to be pretty how it comes out. So I feel like that was a long answer, and I'm not sure that it made sense. But
well, that is why I paraphrase it all. Don't worry, I got it. So community. But I love that you're creating pockets for when you have these memories, you can save them. And at some point, you're going to go back through all those memes and all those songs, and you're going to be celebrating. There'll always be sadness, right? But you'll be celebrating her memory. And I'm glad you're saving those. That's a really special thing. And then getting back into your community.
Well, it was really allowing.
Well, I was just saying, not just allowing your community to serve you, but also to get back into community. So you joined back in your groups and you started, getting back into action and getting back into the things that you knew would fill you up, even if they didn't just then. You had that confidence that they would be what you needed down the line. And we always say action first, feelings follow. So whether you're listening to music, even if you don't feel like it, or you're going to your group, even though you don't want to, you're doing these things knowing it's going to take you where you want to go, and the feelings will follow.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been really funny because, I don't necessarily have a negative view of humanity, but you just don't realize how good humanity can be until situations like this. Because I remember there was one time, when we were preparing for her funeral, I went to go buy some stuff from Hobby Lobby for it. And I went to go check out. And the woman who was checking me out, I hadn't even really said anything, but she looked at me and she goes, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" And I just burst into tears. I was like, "No, I'm not okay." And I just started bawling. And she goes, "Oh my gosh, come here." And she ran around and gave me this big hug and just held me for 5 minutes in the store. And I was bawling my eyes out. And I would have never, she took the time to pay attention. And, that's not something people do often. And then I had another encounter where I hadn't realized that my brother-in-law he had originally said he was going to keep Katie's phone to give to their son when he started going to school. And so I would just randomly text her phone number and be like, "I miss you today," and, things like that. And then one day, just recently, probably 2 months ago, I texted her and I was like, "I'm thinking about you." And, I shared whatever I was thinking. And somebody responded and they were like, "Who is this? Who misses me?" And I was like, "Oh, whoop, I didn't know he gave up her phone number." So I told him, I was like, "I'm sorry. I thought this was the phone of my sister who died last year. And I'm sorry to bother you." She's like, she introduced herself to me. She's like, "Oh, sweetie, whenever you want to text her, you just text. I already put you in my phone. And I know that you're not, you just text and say whatever you want to say." And I was like, "Oh, you're so sweet." So I know. So I haven't really texted back yet, but it was just so nice that she wasn't creep or whatever. So I mean, not only the people who I know love me, but people have been kind when they don't even know me, and it's been nice. So that's encouraging as well to see that humanity does step up and do the right thing sometime, and show kindness to others. So it's just been I've learned a lot in this process, and I hate it. I wish I didn't have to go through it, but here we are, and I'm glad that my aunt, my uncle, and my sister. I always used to tease my uncle that my sister was his favorite, and so now that he only lasted 4 months and 1 week after her passing, when I get to heaven, I'm going to totally make fun of him. And be like, I told you. I knew she was your favorite. So.
Well, if there's anybody that is listening that is going through their own grief that pops up certainly throughout the holidays, but we know anytime throughout the year, what encouragement would you give them?
I would encourage them to face the feelings. I know there's going to be a time where you have to, get on with business and do what you got to do, but also make space in your life to be able to sit down and face the feelings. Because if you don't deal with the grief now, it's just going to come out later, and it's going to be harder and worse, and it'll affect people around you in some way, shape, or form, usually not in a good way. So I know in our society, we tend to be like, oh, just buck up and move on and act like nothing ever happened. But that's not the way to do it. And don't be afraid of letting people see your vulnerability. Like after, months and months and months of nonstop, what I felt like was nonstop crying and everything just at a drop of a hat. For Mother's Day this year, my son, who's 12, in his Mother's Day card wrote, Mom, I know you've been sad since Katie died, but thanks for not letting it bring the rest of us down. And that was the biggest compliment to me, because I thought I was nothing but a basket case all the time, crying nonstop. And I wouldn't try and hide it from them. And if they'd ask me what's wrong, I'd be like, I just miss your aunt and your uncle, and I'd be honest with them about that. But the fact that he said that it wasn't bringing the rest of them down, I was like, okay, good. I'm not screwing up my children as much as I feared I am with my grief. So don't try and hold it in, and find the healthiest ways you can to let it out. I know it's easy to turn to things that can, help us to avoid or numb, but that's really not going to be a good long-term solution, because it all comes out somehow, right, Denise? It all comes out somehow.
Yep. You don't want them in the trunk, and you don't want them in the driver's seat. I like that.
Yep.
So figuring out ways to express yourself, but then also, keep yourself regulated. And it also sounds like you were going through life, you were working, you were going through the motions, even if you weren't fully there. And that actually does help in the grieving process, because if you were in bed for 4 months, that would drastically impact everyone in your life and all the things that you're up to. So.
And honestly, I actually, because of my understanding of grief and how it can look and everything, I actually did kind of, toward the beginning of the process, maybe it was after a few months when I wasn't snapping out of it, I knew that I was struggling with some of the things that I normally did well. Like I could feel that I was scatterbrained and I was struggling with keeping up with things, and I would forget stuff. And I still have some of that, but I definitely feel like it's getting better overall. But for the first year, it was really hard, and even beyond the first year. So I actually did talk to people that I work with, and I said, I was upfront with them, and I said, I know that I'm not necessarily going to be able to tell if I'm falling short, just because I understand how grief is. And I know I'm going to fall short because I can't control any of this, no matter how hard I try. So please let me know if you see something that really concerns you. Please don't be afraid to have that conversation, because I want to do what I can, particularly in my job. I said, I want to do the best I can, but right now my best is not going to be my normal. And I think that, that helped me to not just like hope that I could slide by with making mistakes and doing things, just because it's not my normal to be that way. And I know I have a tendency to beat myself up over things. So, just being honest, even like on that level, was really helpful for me because, I don't know if it helped the people I talked to so much, but it helped me to be able to not be like, there's an elephant in the room that I'm failing and I can't talk about it. And I don't know how to fix it because there's just nothing. I'm trying the best I can and it's just not enough. And you know what I mean? Does that make sense? So,
yeah. Absolutely.
So, I think that was also a very important thing for a recovering perfectionist like me, who's really hard on themselves, to just be upfront and honest with people and be like, please have patience with me, but also please be honest if I need to, do something. So, and everybody that I had that conversation with was so gracious and so kind about it. And they weren't, nasty at all. And that made a huge difference. So, yeah.
So you're saying there's hope?
Yes, there is. I remember when all this first started, somebody who had lost her mother the year before, and I had been walking with her through that, she sent me a picture, and it was a picture of what grief is. And the first picture was grief was this huge ball inside this jar, and it took up almost all the space. And then the next picture was the same huge ball, but the jar had gotten bigger. And she was like, your life is going to keep expanding. The grief will still be there, but it won't take up as much room. And it's like, okay, and that's true. And that's where our, the hope that we know that God's with us in it. And even if we don't understand, one of the things that I've been learning is that when God allows hard things, that at least in my experience so far, it was in the safest possible way. Katie died in her sleep. She didn't suffer. She wasn't sick. There wasn't a long period of prolonged uncertainty or fear or pain. Like, I can't think of a better way to die. And, even my nephews and my brother-in-law, God has brought a wonderful woman for them to show them love and to be the mom that they need. And that's so they don't have to go a long time without somebody. And even though it's hard for me to see that, I can recognize that it's the safest thing for them. And so it's just trying to, appreciate that and be okay with whatever comes next, and know that, even though it hurts and I did feel abandoned, that I wasn't, and that God is making provisions for all of us in the midst of it, even though it doesn't look like how I want it to necessarily.
I love that analogy of the jar. The grief doesn't necessarily get smaller, but your dreams get bigger and your life expands, and you continue to go and to grow. And you learn that the grief never goes away, but it doesn't have to own your life. And I think that's the hope, right? So for those that are going through grief right now, especially in the holidays, this too shall pass. It does not last forever. It will always be there, and it will always be a part of your story, because she's a part of your story, but it won't be your whole story. So thank you, Pamela, for sharing a bit of your story today and the tips and tricks that have supported you, not only this holiday season, but in over the year and a half. And for those listening, please share a bit of your story, what's helped you, in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll see you same time, same place next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your event, workshop, school, church, or organization, then please email racheltimothy.stopsis@gmail.com. If you are interested